Very good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to being with me this afternoon. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, and today I want us to pay just a little bit of attention to some of the details surrounding Shabaab. I know it's very active right now, and the government of Somalia has been having an offensive against it. Shabaab has been creating a lot of troubles in Somalia since about 15 or so years ago, with an aim to remove the current Western-backed government as they perceive it, and they're fighting to have an Islamic state in Somalia. That is just one of the key motives that made Al-Shabaab to be and to do what they do as we know them today. But for the conversation you're going to have this afternoon, I just want us to get a bit of a background and understand what Al-Shabaab is, where it came from, and some of the things that advances their ideological belief, because I believe largely, as we all know, the war and the activities are based on ideological beliefs. So Al-Shabaab, my name is Mira Mugutu, by the way. A very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and you're joining us from. Today being the 18th of October 2022, just about 4 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi. I don't know what time it is where you're watching me from. So Al-Shabaab, translated in Somali, means the youth. All right, so the youth, and in full in Arabic, they're called Harakat Al-Shabaab Al-Mujahideen. And it is a Somalia-based militant group with links to Al-Qaeda. Beginning in 2006, the group waged an insurgency against Somalia's transitional federal government during that time. And just a quick one, it was formed in the early 2000s. Al-Shabaab seeks to establish an Islamic state in Somalia, and the group is capable of carrying out deadly attacks across East Africa, despite suffering setbacks in recent years due to African Union-led military operation. And so one of the most impoverished countries in the world, that is Somalia, has seen militant groups come and go in its decades of political upheaval. Analysts say the forerunner of Al-Shabaab and the incubator for many of its leaders was Al-Tihad. So there was another group that preceded Al-Shabaab, and it was called Al-Iltihad Al-Islami, AIAI, or in English, Unity of Islam, a militant Salafi group that peaked in the 1990s after the fall of Siad Barre, who led the country from 1969 to 1991 regime, and the outbreak of civil war. AIAI's core was a band of Middle East educated Somali extremists that was partly funded and armed by Al-Qaeda's chief, Osama bin Laden. Okay, and in the early 90s, Osama bin Laden had found safe refuge in Sudan. Remember, Sudan was blacklisted as one of the countries that sponsor terrorism across the world after they discovered that bin Laden had been given safe haven in Sudan in the early 90s. So, but it has been President Donald Trump removed Sudan from that list just before he left office a few years ago. Now, in the early 2000s, a rift developed between AIAI's old guard, which had decided to create a political front. This is the group that preceded Al-Shabaab. So we're just trying to trace and look at how Al-Shabaab came to be, the formation, and what drives this very dangerous extremist group. So the AIAIs, and in English, the Unity of Islam, which had decided to create a political front, and younger members who sought the establishment of a greater Somalia under fundamentalist Islamic rule. The hardliners eventually joined forces. So this group was split. So there were hardliners, who eventually joined forces with an alliance of Sharia courts known as the Islamic Courts Union, ICU, and we shall be looking at this union as we proceed on the show, and served as its youth militia. So this Al-Ittihad Al-Islami, So the short is AIEI, but we'll call it the Unity of Islam. So this Unity of Islam, that is what it's translated in English, formed a unit known as the Islamic Courts Union and served as its youth militia. Okay, so this bigger umbrella of a group formed a smaller group within it, the Islamic Courts Union, and served as its youth militia because, as I started by telling you, Al-Shabaab, and you translate it to English, it means the youth. Okay, and Al-Shabaab and the ICU wrested control of the capital in June 2006, a victory that stoked fears in neighboring Ethiopia of spillover jihadi violence at the capital of Somalia, that is Mogadishu. And Al-Shabaab originated as a militia affiliated, as I said, with the Islamic Courts Union, ICU, which was formed to cater for the younger members of the group, the AIAI, the Islamic Courts Union, a federation of local clan-based Islamic courts that have been founded in the southern Somalia in 2004 to combat the lawlessness and banditry afflicting the area since the collapse of the government of Mohammed Siad Barre in 1991. So you see, when they were being formed, the intentions seemed to be not as extreme as we know them today. And that's why I tell you, every time we have these conversations surrounding the security status of Somalia and the fact that the government right now is working together with some local militia to try to fight Al-Shabaab itself, it makes me very nervous, because normally it starts as a very good idea, working towards an idea to fight against something they perceive as evil, that is bringing them trouble in the community that they're in. So right now, the government of Somalia is together with some militant group is fighting the Al-Shabaab, and they seems to be doing a very good job. Okay, and this Islamic Courts Union, where Al-Shabaab originated from, a federation of local clan-based Islamic courts that had been founded in southern Somalia to combat the lawlessness and banditry afflicting the area. You see, so the formation of this ICU, the Islamic Courts Union, really was not bad, was not extremist, but I guess a militant group is a militant group, and that's what we've kept saying here. After the Somalia government is perhaps done fighting the Al-Shabaab, which I know is something that will take quite a while, So what will happen to these groups that are supporting it in the fight against the Al-Shabaab? Because I don't think they've sat down and thought through this whole idea and how they will fit in. Should the Al-Shabaab be defeated, now the new government will come in, or a more stable Somalia will come in. Where will this militia that is now helping the government, where will it fit in the governance system of Somali government? Because I don't think they're just helping the Somali government fight the Al-Shabaab for nothing. There has to be something that they hope that they will gain after their efforts, and a lot of times they usually ask to be included as part of the government, and sometimes their ideologies don't really merge with the orthodox way of doing things. So anyway, I just needed to underscore that, very important. So the ICU, or the Islamic Courts Union, as we've seen there, was formed in Somalia, in southern Somalia in 2004 to combat the lawlessness and banditry afflicting the area since the collapse of the government of Mohammed Siad Barre in 1991. And from 2004, the militia, or this militia, acted as an armed wing of the ICU. Okay, that is Al-Shabaab. It was now, so Al-Shabaab was armed. I think they might have gone through some training to allow them to better operate this weapon. So it was the armed group of the Islamic Courts Union, and the aim was to combat the lawlessness and banditry afflicting the area. Okay. So incorporating fighters from the disbanded Somalia militant Islamist group of AIAI, as well as a number of fighters who had fought for the Al-Qaeda network or received training from it. So you see where they are drawing their members already from extremist groups. The group came to be known as Al-Shabaab, meaning the youth, and it was led by Aden Hashi Farah Ayo. a Somali operative reportedly trained by Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Ideologically, Al-Shabaab took a more extreme stance compared with the mother group, which was the ICU as a whole, espousing another version of Islam at odds with this Sufi influenced form practiced by many Somalis. So Al-Shabaab, I think when you look at where it drew its first membership from, from Al-Qaeda and some of these networks whose ideological drive is quite extreme compared to the perhaps I don't want to say moderate Islamism in Somalia, but Somalia is a Muslim country, but it's not. I don't say liberal, but yes, it is a Muslim country. But Al-Shabaab's version of the Islam that they wanted Somalia to adopt was quite extreme. So that is the difference. And remember, where did it come from? From the ICU, from the Islamic Courts Union, and Al-Shabaab was the armed wing of the ICU. And initially, why was it formed? To fight lawlessness and banditry affecting the southern Somalia in 2004. Now, in early 2006, Al-Shabaab fighters played a prominent role, supporting the ICU, that is the Islamic Courts Union, in combat against a coalition of Mogadishu warlords that the United States covertly supported in an attempt to prevent the spread of militant Islamism. Okay, the ICU defeated the warlords and took control of Mogadishu in June 2006. So you can see these warlords that were supported, another is extremist militant group that was supported by United States to try to fight the ICU and these other groups that had extremist Islamism. Okay, and the ICU also changed that month, the ICU also changed, that is in June 2006, the Islamic Courts Union changed its name to Somali Supreme Islamic Courts Council, SSICC. Now you wonder, Somali's Supreme Islamic Courts Council, but also it has an armed unit, that is the Al-Shabaab. And the victory strengthened Al-Shabaab, allowing fighters, after they defeated the warlords, the Mogadishu warlords that had been supported by the United States covertly, because they were attempting to prevent the spread of militant Islamism. They had seen how that was happening in other Arab worlds, so they were preventing that to be the case in Somalia. So anyway, they were defeated. This group that the US was supporting, this group was defeated, and this really gave Al-Shabaab a reason to gain ground, and that really strengthened their resolve to even push further their ideology, allowing fighters to take possession of arsenals belonging to the warlords. Okay, so they inherited that. And you can imagine these warlords, the kind of weapons they were using. If the United States was supporting them, which was, that means they had really good weapons, sophisticated, weapons. And so they took possession of that after the warlords were defeated, and I think they left. Now the SSICC, that is the Somali Supreme Islamic Courts Council, takeover in Mogadishu was a threatening development for the TFG, then operating from Kenya, the transitional federal government of Somalia at that time. It was operating here in Kenya, in Nairobi, and the Somali city of Baidabo. And for the transitional federal government, international supporters, especially the United States, which feared that the SSICC would provide a haven for Al-Qaeda. So let's just see how that group shaped up. I know 2006, during that fight, that the Al-Shabaab, the ICU, the Islamic Courts Union, forced these warlords, the Mogadishu warlords that are being supported by the United States. They defeated them, but in December, that was in June, sometimes in the middle of 2006, but in December 2006, I think things changed a little bit, and that made the Al-Shabaab take another, this conflict took another shape, or these extremism activities took another shape. This is because Ethiopia, a majority Christian nation, invaded Somalia in December 2006 and ousted the ICU from Mogadishu with little resistance. Okay? So Ethiopia invaded Somalia. All right? After, I think it was in collaboration, it was invited by the federal government of Somalia, which was operating by that time in Nairobi, because it really could not be in Mogadishu. They had taken over the ICU. Al-Shabaab had taken over. Now, the intervention, which came at the request of Somalia's transitional government, radicalized Al-Shabaab, and they could not imagine a Christian nation like Somalia, a majority Christian nation like Somalia, like Ethiopia, sorry, would come and interfere with their dream of having, an Islamic state based on the ideology there in Somalia. So that really is where we saw true radicalism happening there. After much of the ICU fled to neighboring countries, Al-Shabaab retreated to the south, where it began organizing guerrilla assaults, including bombings and assassinations on Ethiopia forces. Some experts say it was during these years that the group morphed into a full-fledged insurgency, gaining control over large pieces of territory in central and southern Somalia. And the Ethiopian occupation, as many perceive it, was responsible for transforming the group from a small, relatively unimportant part of more moderate Islamic movement into the most powerful and radical armed faction in the country. So before this invasion by Ethiopia, Al-Shabaab was not at the levels of, say, of what we see them today. You can't compare them. I wanted to say Hezbollah and this other, extremist groups, but no. At that time, it was still very significantly smaller than what it is today. But it is this invasion that really ignited their resolve to even want to fight for a cause that they truly believed. And anyway. Addis Ababa said the intervention was a reluctant response, but when Ethiopia intervened, there was not much resistance. I think they did not expect it, so there was not much resistance. So they were able to get them out of Mogadishu and to draw them to the south of Somalia, and to calls by the ICU for jihad against Ethiopia, and this led the call for jihadism on Ethiopia and its renewed territorial claims against both Ethiopia and Kenya. We know they claim northern part of Kenya and some parts of southern, I think, Ethiopia or something like that. It has stressed that the intervention was supported by the United States and the African Union, among others. I wouldn't be surprised, and I will not rule anything out of that. And I think that's why Kenya, we found ourselves in the crossroads, because if Al-Shabaab cannot go and fight against the United States, so they will look for the soft targets and the countries they perceive are friendly to the United States. And of course, Kenya, we are one of them, and that's why we've really suffered in some of these attacks. The new Islamist nationalist fighters swelled Al-Shabaab's ranks from around 400 into the thousands between 2006 and 2008. The group's ties to Al-Qaeda emerged during this period, and Al-Shabaab leaders praised the terrorist network and condemned what they characterized as U.S. crimes against Muslims worldwide over what was happening, over that attack, that invasion that Ethiopia led, that removed them from the capital and other key areas within Somalia and drove them to the west. So Al-Qaeda joined in and said, this is not just an attack on Al-Shabaab, this is an attack against Muslims worldwide. As I said, this is an ideological war, an ideological religious war. So it's a very complicated war. You can't just have people surrender. These are people who are fighting for a cause that they are willing to die for, as we have seen a lot of these, suicide bombers even die in the course of their fighting over what they believe to be True. The State Department in the U.S. designated Al-Shabaab a foreign terrorist organization in February 2008. Al-Shabaab's leadership declared allegiance to Al-Qaeda in 2012. So that is when they became officially affiliated to Al-Qaeda. Estimates of Al-Shabaab's membership range from 5,000 to 10,000, according to a 2020 report, and I'm sure perhaps the numbers have gone up. The group regularly forces civilians, including women and children, to enter its ranks. Other recruits volunteer. They volunteer to join often for financial reasons. So. All right, so as I said, the international intervention came to the end of 2006. And of course, the US-backed Ethiopian forces have explained that. And the international aid workers also became targets for attacks during this time, as did the African Union peacekeepers, AMISOM, authorized by the UN Security Council in February 2007. And in October 2008, the federal government, the transitional federal government, signed a power-sharing agreement with members of the former SSICC. All right, remember the SSICC, the Islamic Courts Union, that later transformed to the Somali Supreme Islamic Courts Council, that is the SSICC. Okay, so the Somali government entered into an agreement with this, providing for the incorporation of moderate Islamists into the government. Al-Shabaab still fiercely opposed to any compromise. So Al-Shabaab was the armed wing. So somehow they had separated, but they're still the same thing, but they had separated because Al-Shabaab now adopted a more extremist view or approach over things. So when their mother group now signed an agreement with a peace agreement or whatever, power sharing agreement with the transitional federal government of Somalia, they were not happy and they denounced the agreement, even though it set a timetable for the withdrawal of Ethiopian troops from Somalia at that time. So that's why Somalia and Ethiopia, the ties there that you see as far as the fight against Al-Shabaab is concerned. And Al-Shabaab continued to extend the area under its control in 2009, banning behaviors that it deemed un-Islamic and implementing punishments including beheading, stoning, amputation for offenders. In July 2010, Al-Shabaab suicide bombers staged the group's first major attack outside Somalia, killing about 75 people gathered in Kampala, Uganda, to watch a screening of World Cup football game. Al-Shabaab also claimed the attack as a retaliation for Ugandan troops' participation in AMISOM. Al-Shabaab drew further international condemnation for first banning and then restricting assistance from international aid groups in southern Somalia during a deadly drought and famine in 2011. By mid-2011, Al-Shabaab appeared to be on the offensive. Worn down by repeated clashes with AMISOM forces, the group retreated from Mogadishu in August 2011. In October the same year, the group was forced to fight on a second front when several thousand Kenyan soldiers entered southern Somalia in response to a series of alleged Al-Shabaab attacks and kidnappings in Kenya. The Kenyan forces in Somalia officially marched with AMISOM in June 2012, and an AMISOM offensive in October of that year succeeded in driving Al-Shabaab out of Kismayo, the port city that had been the group's last urban stronghold. So what are the objectives? I know it's ideological. And of course, some analysts have different views, and right now there are different factions within the Al-Shabaab itself and within the group, and they all have different objectives now. Although Al-Shabaab as a whole continues to pursue its broad aim of establishing Islamic State in Somalia, a major cleavage among the group's leaders divides those known as nationalists, who largely seek to oust the central government, from militants with transitional aims. And of course, the unifying idea of Al-Shabaab is opposition to the Western-backed government. So what Al-Shabaab really does not want, of course, we saw earlier on when I was just taking you through that information. When Ethiopia, of course, backed by the US and other countries, invaded Somalia and got them out of Mogadishu and other areas that they had claimed, They say that was a war that was declared against Muslims across the world. But they also believe that democracy, or these elections that we see Somalia trying to do, and the changes that we've seen in the democratic space in Somalia, they truly believe that is un-Islamic. Since Somalia is an Islam country, it is not supposed to be pegged on, the governance of that country is not supposed to be pegged on Western democracy. So that, because they feel that really threatens their religion. So anything that is deemed Western, especially the way of governance, which is based on democracy, where, you know, a universal suffrage and things like that, they don't want that. That is not something that Al-Shabaab wants. So that is what they fight. That is the core thing they fight. They're saying democracy in the Western world style should not be practiced in Somalia. And I think when you look at a lot of Arab countries, you know, you'll find that that is the case. That is the case. They don't have the Western style of democracy. The kind of governance that these countries practice is quite different, and a lot of times is anchored on the, you know, on Sharia law here and there. So that's what they want. They want something like that, not a place where democratic practices are carried out. And so that is what they find, because they believe that will pollute their religion especially. So that is the one thing, the unifying factors. As much as they're different groups there, they're different factions, but one unifying idea of Al-Shabaab is opposition to the Western-backed government with its Western-backed kind of democratic practices that threatens the practice of Islam as they would want it to. In areas it controls, Al-Shabaab enforces its own harsh interpretation of Sharia, prohibiting various types of entertainment such as movies and music, the sale of a cart, that is mirah, a narcotic plant that is often chewed, smoking, and the shaving of beards. Stonings and amputations have been meted out to suspected adulterers and thieves. The group bans cooperation with humanitarian agencies. They block aid deliveries, as you know, and this we've seen how that has happened. Now, who is Al-Shabaab, or how is Al-Shabaab funded? Who is funding Al-Shabaab? Now, counter-terrorism experts have argued that Al-Shabaab has benefited from several sources of income over the years, including other terrorist groups, piracy, kidnapping, and extortion of local businesses, farmers, and aid groups, among others. The Eritrean government has in the past been accused of financing the group, but it has denied these claims. But there are some very substantial, you know, information that could prove that. But of course, the Eritrean government has since denied these claims. Al-Shabaab has built an extensive racketeering operation with checkpoint taxation on illicitly traded charcoal, bringing in millions of dollars per year, despite the UN ban on Somali charcoal exports put in place in 2012. The group also profits from smuggling contraband sugar across the Kenyan border, a scheme in which Kenyan forces have been accused before of involvement, allegedly. The United Nations say that in 2019, Al-Shabaab spent upwards of $21 million on fighters, weapons, and intelligence. Can you imagine? It's a whole government within itself. And that the group was enjoying sizable budgetary surpluses. Can you imagine? It's able to fund its activities and still have some left in the coffers. Okay, so what has been some of the regional impacts? I think we've gone through a few. The UN Security Council authorized the African Union to lead a peacekeeping force in Somalia, which is known by its acronym AMISOM. In early 2007, its primary mandate was to protect the country's transitional government, which had just returned to power in Mogadishu. Remember, they were in Kenya from 2004. But now they had returned to Mogadishu, and the AMISOM's key mandate was to protect the transitional government. Uganda was the first nation to send forces into Somalia under AMISOM, and it maintains the largest contingent in the regional force and more than 6,000 troops. Other military forces came from Burundi, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Djibouti. And at that time, the total number was 20,000. We know AMISOM now is transformed. So right now, it's not AMISOM, it's actually ATMIS. ATMIS, all right? The African Union Transitional Mission in Somalia or something, ATMIS. All right, so Al-Shabaab struck outside of Somalia for the first time, as I said, in 2010. They attacked, they lay an attack in Uganda, and we've seen that happen. So just yesterday, let me see if I can get that, update. This was a press statement from Anthony Blinken, that is Secretary of State of the United Nations, titled Terrorist Designation of Al-Shabaab Leaders. And the United States remains steadfast in our support of East African Union-led efforts to counter the threat of Al-Shabaab, one of Al-Qaeda's most dangerous affiliates, which has killed thousands of people, including Americans, in Somalia and across East Africa. Today, that was yesterday, the Department of State is designating 5 Al-Shabaab leaders as especially designated global terrorists, SDGTS, under Executive Order 13224 as amended, and they've issued the names there: Mohammed Mire, Yasir Jiz, Yusuf Ahmed Haji, Mustafa Ato, and Mohammed Abdi Aden, who is an Al-Shabaab leader and was part of the cell that planned the Dusit hotel attack in 2019 here in Kenya, and the rest of others. Also, the details have been given. Additionally, the Department of the Treasury is concurrently designating a network of 9 Al-Shabaab financial facilitators. As a result of these actions, all property and interest in property of those designated today that are subject to U.S. jurisdictions are blocked, and all U.S. persons are generally prohibited from engaging in any transaction with them. So that was the latest from the Secretary of State Anthony Blinken there in the U.S. So we see, and as we speak right now, I think strides are being made, and the current government of Somalia, the new government, seems to be having a renewed commitment as far as fighting Al-Shabaab is concerned. There were, some few wins here and there during the last administration of President Farmajo, but much seems to be done now in this new government as far as fighting Al-Shabaab is concerned. So I wanted us to just understand a bit of some background information. Who are the Al-Shabaab? How did they how were they set up, and what made them to morph to what they are today? So hopefully the information will be useful even as we continue looking at the current developments in Somalia as far as Al-Shabaab is concerned. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. This has been Diaspora Dispatches. My name is Miriam Ogutum. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.